Hello. Isn't it great to be together today? Excellent. Special welcome to the kids. Where are you, DK? Excellent. You have got one of these in your little pack, and I have got some summer dosh for you. If you can bring me one of those filled in at the end of the service, you get loads of dosh. We've got stacks of it. Make sure that I lose it all. So make sure you've got something in your hand, kids. You're so, so welcome. It's great to have the children with us today. They're going to be here as part of our service throughout the summer. So today we're kicking off a new series called Lives That Inspire. And over the next 5 weeks, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at different characters from the Bible whose stories still speak to us today. They encourage us to live boldly. They encourage us to live faithfully, and they encourage us to live courageously. And today, I've got the privilege of speaking about Esther. Esther was a woman whose courage, whose wisdom, and whose obedience actually changed the course of history. And her story has inspired me really deeply, and my prayer is that it will do the same for you today. So we're just going to take a moment just to open our hearts to God for what he wants to say to us today. Jesus, thank you so, so much that you are here in this place today. Thank you that not one of us is here by chance, but because you wanted us here. And God, we open our hearts to hear your voice, to hear your words for us. And we pray, have your way with us today, Jesus. We make room for you in our hearts today. Amen. Okay, so if you don't know the book of Esther, Sorry, I'm going to start again because I just babbled. The story of Esther is a book in the Bible named after her. It's just 10 chapters long and is really very readable. So Esther was a young Jewish orphan and she lived in Persia. She was being raised by her cousin Mordecai. And in the book of Esther, do you know that God isn't mentioned once? That's right, not even once. But although that might seem a bit odd to us, it's actually a fantastic writing technique by the author, as the whole book is an invitation to those who read it or hear it to look for what God's doing, even when it's not really obvious. And once you know that, as you look through the book, you can see God everywhere, behind every twist, behind every coincidence, behind every moment. So we're going to spend 5 minutes, and I'm going to tell you the whole book of Esther in 5 minutes. So are you ready? Great. Let's dive right into the story. So the story starts with King Xerxes of Persia throwing 2 enormous banquets. The second banquet lasts for 180 days. Can you imagine that? 180 days. All of these banquets were to show off his wealth and his power. And at the end of the 180 days, he calls for his wife, Queen Vashti, to appear at the banquet to show off how beautiful she was. She refuses. The king gets furious and banishes her and says she's never allowed to see him again. So because he has no queen, a nationwide search for a new queen begins. It's like a kind of ancient beauty pageant, if you will. And Esther is entered, and guess what? Yes, against all odds, she wins. A Jewish orphan becomes the queen of Persia. And God puts Esther's position of power to use immediately when Mordecai, remember that's her cousin who raised her, he uncovers this plot to assassinate the king. He tells Esther, Esther passes the information on, and the king's life is saved. And Mordecai is credited in the royal records for saving the king's life. So even though God hasn't been mentioned in the story, you can still see him orchestrating things behind the scenes. And then we meet another character who's the villain of our story. You can either call him Haman, whatever you want. Today we're calling him Haman. He's the villain of our story, saying he's little boo. Okay? Boo. That wasn't very good. He's the villain of our story. Thank you. That's much better. So Haman is promoted to the highest position in the kingdom. And the king commands everybody to bow down to him. Mordecai refuses. He's a Jew, and he will not bow to anyone but God. And Haman is furious and convinces the king to issue a decree that kills all of the Jews. So Mordecai urges Esther to act, but there's a problem. Approaching the king without being summoned is punishable by death, even for the queen. And in the Bible, Mordecai says this to Esther: "Who knows if perhaps you were made queen for such a time as this?" Esther responds with courage. She asks the Jews to fast and pray for her, and she says she's going to approach the king, and if I perish, I perish. So what Esther does is she hosts 2 banquets for the king and Haman. After the first banquet, the king tries to go to sleep at night, but realizes he can't sleep, so he asks for the royal chronicles to be read to him. And in those royal chronicles, can you remember what it says? It reminds the king about Mordecai saving his life. And the king realizes he's never rewarded Mordecai for that. So in the morning, Haman comes into the king to request Mordecai's execution, but the king asks him to go and honor Mordecai publicly. So he has to take Mordecai on a horse around and tell everybody all the great things about him. The irony is so powerful. And it's at that second banquet, it wasn't 180 days long, this one, but at that second banquet, Esther reveals her Jewish heritage, which she'd kept hidden from the king initially, and exposes Haman's plot. And she says this in Esther chapter 7, "Your Majesty, if you really care for me and are willing to help, you can save me and my people." After that, the king orders for Haman to be executed. A new decree is issued, and all of the Jews are saved. What's the result of that? Well, it's celebration, it's promotion, it's deliverance. And it all began with one woman's courage. The story of Esther encourages us to trust God and to have hope, even when we can't see him working. What a story. There's so much about Esther's story that is inspirational. And whenever I read or I think about her story, I'm inspired by her courage to act when silence would have been much safer, her courage in approaching the king, facing or risking certain death, and her courage to use her influence to advocate for her people. Not just the Jews in Persia at the time, but future generations of God's people, including the family line of Jesus. The deliverance of the Jews as a result of Esther's courage is still celebrated even today. Esther shows us what a person with great faith is like. She was courageous and fearless when she needed to be, and she made herself open and available to be used by God. And I don't know about you, but I can't even imagine the amount of courage it must have taken Esther to agree to go to the king to ask him to help her people. She must have known the story about Queen Vashti and what happened to her. But even so, she chose to do something that no person was allowed to do: approach the king. Approaching the king without being summoned was punishable by death, even for her, the queen. And it was clear from the Bible that Esther knew the cost of speaking to the king, as this was what she said when Mordecai asked her to speak to the king on behalf of her people. She answered, "Tell Mordecai that there is a law against going in to see the king, and all his officials and all his people know about this law. Anyone who goes to see the king without being invited will be put to death. The only way anyone can be saved is for the king to hold out the gold scepter to that person, and it's been 30 days since he's asked for me." And that's in Esther chapter 4. Can you imagine being put in that position? Being asked to intervene in a life or death situation, knowing you were the only one who could make a difference. Well, that's exactly the situation that Esther found herself in. But she did not sit back. She acted. She must have been terrified going into that room, but she didn't let fear win. She was courageous. She saved others through her courage and her strength. She was willing to risk her life to save others. What about you? Have you ever had to take a personal risk to obey God? Have you ever had to take a personal risk to obey God? But Esther didn't walk into that room unprepared, and I love this part of her story. When she decided to speak to the king, before she went in, Esther prayed, and she asked others to join her. She asked for God's help. She asked for God's divine intervention, and other people stood with her in prayer. And this is what it says in Esther chapter 4. Esther sent a message to Mordecai saying, "Bring all the Jews together in Susa and tell them to go without eating for my sake. Don't eat or drink for 3 days and nights. My servant girls and I will do the same. Then I will go and see the king, even if it means I must die." Other translations of the Bible put it like this: "I will go to the king, even though it's against the law, and if I perish, I perish." What a courageous woman. She put her life, her very existence in God's hands. Esther chose to be courageous because she knew that God was with her. She trusted her life into God's hands. She did what she believed would be right in his sight and resolved to trust in his plan for her life. And the Christian author Heidi Wiseman puts it like this: "So when Esther walked into the king's throne room, she was wrapped not just in a beautiful robe, but also in the prayers of God's people. It wasn't just the king of Persia in that room, but the king, because God was there too." I'm just going to read that bit again. It wasn't just the king of Persia in that room, but the king, because God was in there too. And these weren't the only courageous things and decisions that Esther made. So when the king was looking for a new bride, she was brave enough to leave her cousin who'd raised her since her parents had died. She was brave enough to go into the palace, not knowing what would happen there or what it would be like. And she was brave enough to listen to advice from the palace staff, which granted her favour with them, but ultimately it also granted her favour with the king. These steps of courage that Esther took ensured that she was in the palace at exactly the right time when her people needed someone to stand up for them. No other Jew had such access to the king. When the time came, Esther used her position of power, her influence, and she spoke out. So perhaps God had intended Esther to be queen so that she could save her people. Esther wasn't queen by chance, but because it was part of God's plan. And this is what it says in the Bible. It says, Mordecai sent a reply to Esther. "Don't think for a moment that because you're in the palace, you will escape when all the other Jews are killed. If you keep quiet at a time like this, deliverance and relief will come from somewhere other place, but you and your relatives will die. Who knows if perhaps you were made queen for such a time as this." And that's in Esther chapter 4. There's a real invitation for us today in Esther's story, an invitation for us to look for the activity of God in our lives and in the lives of others, especially when it's not obvious that he's working. You might be in that place right now, here today, where it's not obvious that God is working in your life. Or even worse, you might be in the place where you can't feel that God's there at all. The challenge, the invitation for us, is to find where God is working and to look for what he's doing, because even when we can't see it, he is working. That's from the song Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper. Even when we can't see it, he is working. The story of Esther inspires me to look for what God is doing and be ready to act courageously when he opens doors for me. God is always with us. He's always with you. He's working behind the scenes. He's arranging opportunities. He's arranging possibilities for us. We have a God who loves and who cares for us. We can rejoice in the fact that even in life's trials, God is faithfully at work in our lives and he will carry us through. Even when we can't see it, he is working. Esther teaches us that God doesn't need to be really loud to be present. He was there in every single moment. He was opening doors for her. He was guiding her steps, and he was prompting courage in her. Now, Esther's story inspires me because I know that I've had to walk through some of my very own Esther moments. So since I was really small, it was quite clear to everybody around me that I was either going to be a teacher, because every day I used to take a register and check that all my toys were present. This is Mrs. Fox here. She's been present every day. Well done, Mrs. Fox. So I used to take a register and they were all... Oh, there she is. I won't tell you how old she is. I used to take a register for all my children so people thought I was going to be a teacher or that I was going to work for the church. And this came from my parents were once called into my nursery school and told that I'd lined up all of the children in the nursery class, taken them into the toilets and baptised them all in the sink. Even then, there were signs of a future calling, little 5-year-old me. I didn't get in trouble for that, luckily. The extra thing that you should know about me is that as a child and a young teenager, I was really shy, and I mean like painfully shy. I didn't have any confidence at all in myself as a person, and you certainly didn't want me as part of your group if there was any type of public speaking to be done, because I was not the best public speaker. And when I got baptised, I couldn't even share my story publicly because I was so shy, even though it was in a group of people that I knew really, really well. As you can see, God has done a lot of work in my life. 25 years ago, if you'd have put me in a room with 5 people, I would have been silent. But knowing who he has made me to be and what he's made me to do has made an incredible difference in my life. And looking back now, I can see God moving. I can see how God was positioning me over the years, exactly like he did with Esther, to be where I am now for such a time as this. So I'd love to tell you a few times in my life where I've had to take steps of courage. And I believe all of these have led me to being in this place right now, sharing God's word with you for such a time as this. So the first step of courage was to believe that God was speaking and then to act on it. When I was 17 years old, God spoke to a shy teenage Bex through some very key people in my life who told me they believed that God was saying that I was going to be a leader and I was going to impact many lives. God next spoke to me in my early 20s. I remember that so clearly. I was in a cowshed at an event called New Day, which is a massive annual youth event, attending a talk about women who felt they were called to leadership. The lady speaking said that God wants to tell a girl here in a green top. I looked down. Guess what? Green top. I looked around. No other green tops. I looked at her. She's looking at me. So she said that she felt that I was going to speak to thousands of people about Jesus. And as a shy teenager and young adult, it took a massive step of courage to believe that God was speaking and then to act on it. So you have to believe he's speaking and then act on it. And that was the moment that everything changed for me. Step 2 of courage, saying yes to opportunities to train and grow. For me, church and life in church has been an incredible training ground for my job now. I said yes to various things like Alpha, helping in the kids' work, being part of the youth team, and eventually leading a youth work for many years. A lot of courage, I have to say, was needed to say yes to speaking in church for the first time on a Sunday morning and to leading some big youth events. But I'm so thankful to church and the way it shaped me and given me opportunities, and it shaped the way that I lead now in my job. Step 3 of courage, admitting I was struggling and needing a change of pace. Just before the pandemic, my life changed completely through a series of really challenging circumstances. I really struggled with loneliness, a lack of connection, and the unknown. And being part of the leadership team in my school during lockdown and struggling personally was incredibly hard, and it really took its toll on me. So when schools started to open up again, I decided that I'd wanted to step away from my leadership role as a deputy head teacher and go back and, I don't want to say just be a teacher, be in the classroom and teach. I'd always taught the tiny children, but going back to a teacher, the only job available was in year 6. They're not small. They're the oldest children in the school. I had no experience of teaching them, and they'd likely all be taller than me. But I decided that was the right thing, and it took courage to step it back into the classroom, to step away from something that people had expected of me, to step away from something I'd worked towards for my whole career, but I knew it was the right decision. and I loved it. I had a fantastic team, a great teaching partner, and now had experience teaching from reception to year 6 in a primary school, which I didn't know that I was going to need very, very soon after that moment, but God knew. And 1.5 years into this new role, the deputy head teacher decided to leave, and the role was advertised. So I had a decision to make. Do I apply for the job that I stepped down from 1.5 years ago again or not? So step 4 of courage, deciding the time was right to step back into that role, into leadership, and become the deputy head again. The job had changed, so it wasn't all out of class. It was 3 days out of the classroom and 2 days having a class, so it was made for me. And it took a lot of courage to reapply for that job because I used to do it. There were external candidates, and also there was some opposition from within the school. But this led to step 5, saying yes to becoming a head teacher. So I started as deputy head again in April 2023, and during August that year, I had a phone call to let me know that I wouldn't be returning to the school as deputy, but in a month's time, I'd become the acting head teacher if I said yes. I chose to be courageous and agreed to take on the role. I thought it'd be a great opportunity to test what being a head teacher was really like and see if it was actually something I wanted to do in the future. Well, it has been amazing. I've just finished my 2nd year as the real head teacher. Yes, it has been challenging and a whole new level of tiring, but I've loved it, and I believe that I was put in the role for such a time as this. And when I got the job, one of the first things I genuinely thought about was Esther's story. And you know how you can add little messages onto your alarm on your phone? Well, this is the message that I wake up to every morning. My morning alarm says, "For such a time as this," every morning when I wake up. Thankfully, it's the school holidays now. Woohoo! So it's switched off. Tag parents, you're in. I'm privileged, though, to work in a school, and I'm privileged to have so many people on my staff team who know and love Jesus. And we often get together and we thank God that He has put us together in our school for such a time as this. Esther's story does continue to inspire me. It continues to inspire me to be courageous in my role. Her story reminds me to be an advocate for my people, to be courageous by having difficult conversations so I can deal with problems when they are tiny molehills rather than letting them become massive mountains, to pray for my school, especially when we're facing challenging times, and also to get other people to stand with me in prayer. So I've got a group of girls here at MKCC, and we text each other on our WhatsApp group when we need people to stand with us in prayer. I encourage you, get connected somehow to a group so other people can stand with you in prayer in challenging times. Her story also encourages me to bring God's presence into every room I enter and to look for where God is active in my everyday. As I said earlier, each morning the message on my alarm reminds me that I believe I'm a head teacher for such a time as this. I believe that God has placed me there for a reason, and He wants me to use the influence that He has given me to have an impact on every child, every family, every staff member in my school community and beyond. And I know that God goes with me into every difficult conversation, into every room, and I can rely on Him to be working, even if I can't see it. Esther's story reminds me that I'm here or in my school for such a time as this. If you're here today facing difficult circumstances, no matter what difficult circumstances or decisions we face or you're facing right now, God is able to carry you through them. Put your trust in Him. Even if you're here today saying, "Where is God?" He is working. He is working. Maybe God, like He was in Esther's story, is working in you, is positioning you for such a time as this, whatever the this is in your life. So what about you? Esther's story encourages us to be courageous, to use our influence, to trust God in the unseen, and believe that we are placed where we are for such a time as this. It's no accident anyone is here today. We're here for such a time as this. Winston Churchill once said this: "Fear is a reaction. Courage is a decision. Fear is a reaction. Courage is a decision. So what courageous step do you need to take today? Maybe for you today, courage looks like stepping out and saying, I'm in, and joining a team to serve here at MKCC. Maybe your step of courage is to review your giving and to review your finances after our If Money Talk series. Perhaps for you, your step of courage is to forgive someone or try to repair a broken relationship. It could be that your step of courage is to ask more questions about this Jesus guy and who he is and what he does. Like me, your step of courage might be to use your influence in your workplace or go to work each day believing that God has placed you there for such a time as this. It's not an accident. Or it might be as simple, your step of courage, as looking for God working in your life and to step out in courage when he gives you opportunities. Whatever it is, let Esther's story inspire you to choose courage because God is with you. To choose courage because God is with you. If you remember nothing else out of today, that's what I want you to remember. So I'd like you to say it to the person next to you. Choose courage because God is with you. Choose courage because God is with you. Esther's story inspires us to look for God in action in our own lives. Maybe you're here today and you can relate to knowing God's promises, but you're not feeling his presence. Well, maybe God is encouraging you to trust in him, that even when you can't see it, he is working. This story is an invitation to open our eyes, to see where he's working behind the scenes and to step out in courage. Maybe God has placed you in your role, in your family, in your situation for such a time as this. Our church vision states we're bringing people to Jesus and equipping them to be fully devoted followers of Christ. What courageous step can you take to be part of that? What courageous steps can you take to bring someone to Jesus or help to equip them to be fully devoted? What's God stirring in you this morning or today? There's always a next step. What is yours? What would it look like today if everyone here decided to choose courage this week? Just take a moment to think about the impact this would have in our homes, in our workplaces, in our city, in our classrooms, even in the nations. Choose courage because God is with you for such a time as this. Now, each week at MKCC, we have people at the end of the service to the left and the right who love to pray. So if you want someone to stand with you in prayer, go and see them. Maybe for you today, that's your step of courage. Remember that if it's your first time, we'd love to get to know you better, so please do visit our guest lounge. But please remember to choose courage because God is with you for such a time as this. Have a brilliant rest of your day. Thank you for being with us today.